Welcome, all my fellow Washington brethren and sisters. I am your man and resident Washington football team fan, Lou. Thank you for joining me here on the Washington Football Report. So, Washington's Media Day just took place. Everybody was back together. The whole gang's back together. They did a big media shoot. A lot of content coming out of the Washington Media Group socials. We're posting a bunch of pictures. You saw Chase Young back in the facility. You know, there was this big story and a whole bunch of hoopla, much to do about nothing, about Chase not being at the voluntary OTAs. And we'll talk about that in a later video. But there was information overload. I mean, hours upon hours of Washington content coming from interviews from coaching staff members the first day of the involuntary OTAs and minis. So we heard from 5 different players, including head coach Ron Rivera. So 6 if you total Ron Rivera. And then the day before that, we got to hear from 8 assistant coaches on the squad. So I wanted to separate it into 2 different videos because it's so much information. I didn't want to talk for an entire hour. So I'm going to chop it up into 2 videos. And this first video is centered around what the coaching staff had to say about the players coming back and the new guys that are going to be intermingled and weaved in to this roster in the upcoming 2021 season, and what they've seen from these players thus far in this young season, obviously only having been exposed to these players for maybe 2, maybe 3 weeks max. However, they've still been able to assess these players in some regard, see what they've been able to retain in terms of information and how they've been able to take that onto the field and execute. Now, you know, you got some coaches that have been able to see a little bit more than others, but I thought that this was a really informative little set here that we got from all these coaches. Some spoke for 15, 20 minutes. Others spoke for 6 or 7 minutes. Whatever the case may be, we'll go through the list of every single assistant coach that spoke, and I'll give you a tidbit or 2 from what they had to say, or what I deem to be the most pertinent nugget that I gained from what they had to say. So we start with the first guy that spoke, Sam Mills III, who is the defensive line coach. This is his 2nd year in Washington. I thought that his biggest thing was growth with this unit. It's a young unit, and he was asked about the defensive line. No one in that group, and I talked about this. I said, it's a young defensive line group, and you keep getting these reporters asking, are you going to sign a veteran? Are you going to sign a veteran? Are you going to sign a veteran? Because it's a young group, and it was brought to Sam Mills' attention, not that he didn't already know this, that there's no one inside that group, in that room, if you will, that has 3 years or more of experience in the league. It's a young group. Jonathan Allen essentially is the elder statesman. And when I say 3 years of experience, it's on the defensive end group. You know, you've got a guy in Jonathan Allen going into year 5 of his career, drafted in 2017. However, when you look at the whole entire group, Jonathan Allen is the elder statesman. He's still on his rookie contract. Now, I think that's going to change before the season starts. I do think he's going to get an extension before the season gets kicked off. But that's the oldest guy on the defensive line. And when you go out to the defensive end position, there is no one with more experience than Montez Sweat. Think about that. Montez Sweat is the oldest in terms of NFL years defensive end we have on the roster. I told you this is a young team. I'm excited about that, by the way. I'm excited about that. And Ron Rivera talked about that as far as, look, it's a young group. And you know what? I'm excited. He said, I'm excited about the youth of this group. You know, it means that we've got a lot of room for growth. There's an upside there, and that's something we can be excited about. So, you know, you like to see the young guys play. You like to see them grow. You like to see them take those steps forward. And it means that we're just scratching the surface as a football team. But Sam Mills said, look, the thing that I love about this group and about getting the year 3 of Montez Sweat, getting the year 2 of Chase Young is that these guys can play even faster than they did before. Because when you think about these guys, they're seeing things for the first time, especially Chase Young last year being a rookie. He said Montez is a year ahead of Chase because obviously he got in the league a year prior to Chase Young. So he's seen a little bit more. He's been a part of the action at the NFL level a little bit longer. And you saw that last year. Montez Sweat, I thought, was our best defender last season. I think everyone fell in love with Chase Young, and rightfully so. He was fantastic, and I've already said he's the true difference maker on defense for us. He completes this defense up front. Everything falls into place because of Chase Young's presence. You know, teams aren't double teaming necessarily Montez Sweat. They're giving Chase Young their undivided attention, and that allows Montez Sweat to do what he's doing on the opposite side. And I think things are only going to get better and improve with the addition and the reintegration of the defensive tackle that got injured. Why am I blanking on his name? I can see his face right now. Matt Ioannidis, the Golden Greek, as they would call him. Matt Ioannidis, with his reintegration into this defensive line, and Sam Mills III actually talked briefly about, you know, having a guy like Ioannidis back on that defensive line. It really strengthens that group, makes them whole again, and it really bolsters what they're able to do from a rotation standpoint, and also obviously getting to the quarterback. But you know, when you look at the defense, I thought Montez Sweat was the best defensive lineman we had a season ago, and the growth that we saw from him, he was arguably the most improved player on the defensive side of the football. I think that distinction goes to Cam Sims on the offensive side. But when you look at what Sweat was able to do last year, a lot of that came off of Chase Young, and Young was still learning. You know, there was still that learning curve, that adjustment to be made. And with Sweat, he wasn't, you remember, Sweat had a slow start to his career. We talked about this already in his rookie season. So we saw the growth and maturation in year 2. We're hoping for the same thing for Chase Young in year number 2 for him, and in year 3 for Sweat. And that's essentially what Sam Mills III said, is that, look, it's a young group, but all of these guys, for the most part, you know, with the exception of a couple of the young guys in the 7th round that we drafted, William Bradley King and, of course, Shaka Toney, for the most part, all these guys were here last year. In some regard, you know, Casey Toohill got here a little bit later, but he was here. He played some snaps, some meaningful snaps for this football team. James Smith-Williams was here last year. He was drafted last year in the 7th round. He played meaningful snaps for this ball club. So these guys that are here, for the most part, had experience with this team last year, and you like to think that those guys are going to continue to improve, and that's essentially what Sam Mills III said about his unit and group, looking for big things from them in 2021. You move on to tight ends coach Pete Hainer. This is a guy that a lot of people loved last season. He was very colorful, and the beat reporters, they're closest to the tight end group, so they kind of had this affinity for Pete Hainer last year, talking about his energy and enthusiasm, and as Pete Hainer said, his colorful language. Anyway, this was the first time I had heard from Pete Hainer. I don't think any of us had heard from him. I can't speak for any of you, but I hadn't heard from him. You know, we've heard from Sam Mills. We've heard from Chris Harris, Randy Jordan, Ken Zampese. We've heard from these guys, Steve Russ. You know, we've heard from all of these assistant coaches. I don't think we heard from Pete Hainer last year. I could be wrong, and I could have just missed it. But this is my first exposure to him, and listening to him talk, you can tell he's a teacher, and he loves doing what it is he does for a living, which is, you know, coaching these tight ends up. And, you know, a lot to me was gained from what he had to say, because one of the guys that I am invested in, a guy that I really want to see make this football team, in Samis Reyes, is coached by Pete Hainer. So I really was, and you know they were going to ask him about Samis Reyes. I mean, he's one of the big names of the offseason, and rightfully so. This guy's immense talent. He's got a rags to riches type of story. At least the trajectory of it is rags. He's trying to get to the riches portion of it. And everybody likes from the bottom to the top type of story, and that's what Sammis Reyes has going for him right now. And everybody's rooting for him. He's the underdog. Never played football before. Comes from a different country. He was here by himself, no family, and he had to pretty much try to make it in athletics to support himself. So everybody's rooting for him. And Pete Hainer pretty much said, look, this guy is extremely bright. He's a hard worker. He's an athlete. First and foremost, let me go back a bit. So Pete Hainer pretty much told me what I needed to hear about a month ago when I was doing my mock draft. So he's the guy that's in control of these tight ends. And he said, look, I love Logan Thomas. He was one of the guys that was banging the table for Logan Thomas to be here in Washington because he felt like Logan Thomas had a bunch of untapped potential, and he was right. And so he talked about Logan Thomas, where he is in his development, how much growth he still has as a second-year starter, essentially. Remember, he really wasn't a starter until he got here in Washington, so he thinks there's a ton of more growth for him. But in terms of being a complete tight end, he thinks that he's one of the top 7 tight ends in the league. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but that's his guy. What is he supposed to say, right? Anyway, I digress. He loves Logan Thomas and thinks that this guy is complete and is going to continue to grow and get better. I love to hear that. And we all, I think, have been sold on what Logan Thomas is now, because last year we didn't know. Now we feel like we've got ourselves a quality tight end. The question is behind him, what do you have? And he said, look, you got to be big at the tight end position, especially for what I try to instill in my tight ends and what we're looking for. I can't do anything with a 6'2", 6'3" tight end. I need a 6'5", 6'6" guy that's 250 pounds. That's what I need. And so if that information could have been useful to me, because Brevin Jordan isn't the kind of tight end that Pete Hainer's looking for. And so it all makes sense when you look at all the tight ends that have been here and all the guys that were on the roster last year. You're talking about 6'4", 6'5", 6'6". You're talking about 250, north of 250. Jeremy Sprinkle was damn near 270. He's not looking for Brevin Jordan, 6'2", 243. Those aren't the kind of guys he's interested in having on this roster. They want the big, hulking figure tight ends because, as Hainer said, we're not just looking to develop receivers. If you want to play slot receiver, then you go play receiver and go join their room. This is a tight end group. You got to block. You got to be an extension of the offensive line. You got to be able to pass protect. You got to be able to run block. And yeah, you need to be able to catch the football as well. But you got to be able to do all of the things that being a tight end entails. And small guys generally don't get that done. So I learned a lot from Pete Hainer just listening to him and his philosophy on what a tight end should look like. That said, he loves what Sammis Reyes and John Bates both bring to the table from a size and athleticism standpoint. And he was pretty much I think he was the one assistant coach of all the ones that spoke that said, look, I really can't give you the information that you're looking for right now because I need to see my guys in pads. I need to see them dealing with the heat. I need to see them dealing with the speed of the game. I need to see them be able to adapt and adjust on the fly. I need to see how they react to my coaching when things get real in the field. So he's like, yeah, all of this stuff that we're doing now with helmets on, no shells, running around, this is nice and it's good to get my hands on them, but this ain't the real deal. And so I can't give you what you're looking for on Sammis Reyes or John Bates, but I can tell you this, both of these guys look the part. Both of these guys are extremely smart, and I think these guys have immense potential. Now, that's not to say that Bates is a lock. We've discussed that already. They drafted him to come in and help right away. As far as Reyes is concerned, he could be a project. And he didn't say that, but he said, look, the guy hasn't played football ever in his life. So he's taken some massive strides to get where he is right now, but of course he's still got a long ways to go. And he said the real determining factor will be when they put the pads on, when they get into training camp, when they're actually hitting, when he's actually got to go out and process things on the move, it's hot outside. Can he do all of these things? That's when you will really get a feel for if this guy has a legitimate shot at making this roster or not. But I thought Pete Hainer was fantastic, and I learned a lot listening to him speak. Running backs coach Randy Jordan, one of my favorite guys to listen to because he's blunt. He gives it to you straight, no chaser, no filter. And you know exactly what he's saying because he says exactly what he means. So he talked about Jaret Patterson. I'm just going to tell you right now. I may have to offer up a couple of double O's down the road. I'm not doing that now. But Jaret Patterson is intriguing. This isn't one of the double O's because I think he's got an outside shot at making his team. I still contend that Peyton Barber is a part of this group that, and I will say this. I told you they're keeping 3. I don't think they're keeping 4 backs. He said it. Now, things could change. It's a fluid situation, but Randy Jordan said, we only keeping 3. He said that out of his mouth. We're only keeping 3. And I told you, running back is one of those positions. I don't think they have the luxury of keeping an additional back. I just think last year they carried 3 the entire season. It's a good number. They're not putting a bunch of these guys on the field at the same time. 2 of them at max on the field at the same time. But usually it's only 1 back on the field at a time. I don't see them carrying 4 backs for any reason. So he said it. We're only carrying 3. And I don't see anybody that was on the roster last year, the 3 that were there, I don't see anybody overtaking them. Now, he said this. If you're going to be that third and final back, you not only have to be able to do all of the things we ask you to do, essentially carve out a niche for yourself. You got to be able to protect the quarterback. You got to be able to protect the ball. He said that as well. But you got to also be able to play special teams. And if Jaret Patterson can do that, and he's not just 1 or 2, all of them, all of the special teams. If you can do that, you can find yourself on the roster. So that's something else to take into consideration. Can Jaret Patterson play multiple special teams roles? That'll give him an outside shot. But again, Peyton Barber, I think, has a lot of you don't want to hear this. And I was amazed at how many of you were like, no, Jaret Patterson's making his team. I'm like, hey, don't kill me. I'm just the messenger. I want me some Peyton Barber. As I mentioned, he has a definitive role. But obviously, if you can find a guy that can give you what Peyton Barber gave you and then some in another package, which Patterson could potentially give you, then I understand it. But I can say this, Randy Jordan was really excited about Jaret Patterson. I remember last year listening to Randy Jordan when we drafted Antonio Gibson, and he was more reserved. Like, guys was a receiver. He's still learning the position. There's a lot of things. Jaret Patterson is a running back. And I can tell that there are some things that Randy Jordan really likes about him because the first question right off the bat was about Jaret Patterson, and the biggest smile, appeared on Randy Jordan's face. And he talked about the vision that this guy has. And I just think there's something there with Jaret Patterson, man. I can't quite put my finger on it as to what's going to happen, but they really like this guy. He's going to make it tough. As I said, there are going to be some really tough decisions made by this organization and this coaching staff this summer because there are going to be a lot of quality football players that do not make this team. And we'll talk about a position a little bit later on that has a bunch of guys that we think are quality that are not going to make this team. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting conversation. He also said that Antonio Gibson has really made the transformation from college wide receiver to NFL running back, and now they really want to get him more involved in the pass game. Last year, they were so fixated on, hey, let's just worry about getting this guy acclimated and fully comfortable to being an NFL running back. Let's not put too much on his plate. Remember, we talked about that last year. Now that he is a running back, they feel like he truly has it. And he gave an example in practice of Antonio Gibson pressing the hole, not being too hasty to cut it back. Remember, that was one of the issues early in the season last year. He was cutting things back too quickly. He wasn't allowing plays to develop. And Randy Jordan was like, you see the development. He pressed. And then he was able to turn the corner, get up the field, and get 5 on a play last year that would have probably resulted in 1 or 2 because he would have cut it back too soon. So you're seeing the development. And I showed you a clip last year, that run against the Steelers, the one he got hurt on, that he hurt the toe on. I showed you that he was starting to get it. You could see it, the patience, the pressing of the hole, the allowing things to develop, and then cutting back. You could see it all coming together when he stubbed the toe and had the turf toe late in the season. So now they want to work him in more as a receiver. They want to take advantage of the attributes and skills that he has. So I think that's going to be something to watch out for in the upcoming season as well. So you move on to DB's coach, Chris Harris. I want to start by saying this. I wasn't aware of this. I may have missed this. You guys may have been all over this. I didn't know that he had 2 defensive coordinator interviews this offseason and that we could have lost him. Because I love this guy as our DB's coach. I didn't realize he had gotten the attention around the league and gotten opportunities to interview. And he said that, it was a really good experience. And for him being a first-time DB's coach last year with us, he was shocked to have gotten those opportunities, but, he was grateful for those opportunities. I didn't know that. And when you're doing good work, people take notice. We had the number 2 pass defense in the National Football League. People take notice to those things. But anyway, I digress. A lot of the conversation with him surrounded and revolved around Cam Curl in year 2, William Jackson III and his addition to this unit and what he means, and just the group as a whole and what to expect. With Cam Curl, he's like, this guy is so talented and multifaceted that, he is so smart. We put so much on his plate last year, and the kid digested all of it and was able to go out and play at multiple positions, play free safety, play strong safety, play that Buffalo big nickel, be able to drop over the slot and do a lot of the things that, you ask a 7-year vet to do, and we were asking a first-year guy to do. So they're really excited about his growth and development and what he's going to look like in year 2. Obviously, he doesn't have a defined role this year because Landon Collins is coming back, but they're going to use him. There is no way he won't be on the field in some capacity in the upcoming season. He was also asked, and I thought this was really interesting, about the free safety position. And he said, look, we want a ball hawk. We want a playmaker back there, a guy that can take the ball away. That was something we really lacked at that position. I loved the physicality that we got out of the position from Shays last year. And I thought when he came in, he was an enforcer and he was able to really strike some fear into the hearts of receivers back there. But he was always tentative about making plays on the ball and more so, hey, I'm going to hit somebody. And there were a lot of penalties where he got there early, but instead of him attacking the football, he wanted to attack the receiver, and he picked up penalties instead of going after the football. And so I think when he made that statement, he was essentially saying, we want guys that are trying to take it away. It's one thing to hit somebody, and we love that. I love that. I can't speak for you. But we also want to take the football away. We want to create more turnovers, more short fields for the offense. Hell, we'd love to get in the end zone ourselves if we can do that. So he talked about, Bobby McCain's addition and, potentially spicing things up at the free safety position and trying to get somebody back there that's going to make some plays on the football. And then he talked about William Jackson III, what he brings to the table. And, he talked about his length, his speed, his size, and how that allows you to change up coverages. Obviously, there's been a lot made of Jack Del Rio and Ron Rivera speaking about mixing it up coverage-wise this year and playing a little bit more man, which allows you to get a little bit more creative with blitz packages and things of that nature. And so he kind of piggybacked off of that. Didn't want to give too much, but, he said that it's a really good group. He's excited about this group and that he thinks they can improve upon what they did a season ago. Assistant offensive line coach, Travell Wharton spoke. So listening to him talk about the offensive line, a lot of what he had to talk about was about the veteran leadership that a Charles Leno Jr. brings to the table. He talked about Samuel Cosme and what he brings to the table as a young player, Sadiq Charles, things of that nature. And he pretty much said that Charles Leno is a great addition to the offensive line room, a guy that can help the younger players, especially being a 7th-round pick, which Charles Leno Jr. was coming out of Boise State. He can tell these guys what it is that you have to do to be able to survive in this league, because as a 7th-round pick, much isn't expected of you. For him to not only be drafted in the 7th round, but ultimately be the starter and not miss a single game the last 5 years for the Bears, that speaks to, the ability to adapt and adjust, the ability to take care of your body, stay in shape, battle through injury, and also the ability to get the job done at a high enough level that the team that drafted you is willing to extend you after your contract is up, essentially. So he's giving those guys pointers and tips, and Travell Wharton is like, it is invaluable to have another veteran out there, another set of eyes. As coaches, you want to impart that knowledge on these players, but it's also great to have a veteran that's able to convey that message to the young guys, because as a coach, you can't always get to those guys. And sometimes players see things on the field and they're able to get to those younger players a lot quicker than the coaching staff is able to. So he said that, Leno has been a great influence on the room. Talked about Cornelius Lucas and his development and growth, and how we got good play out of him last year. And he's anxious to see, what Cornelius Lucas looks like in year 2 of the system. And so, he talked about Samuel Cosme and him being an athletic offensive tackle or offensive lineman, and a guy that they really like and think that the sky's the limit for him. And excited to just work with the entire group as a whole. Ken Zampese, quarterbacks coach, spoke. I love Ken Zampese. I think of all the assistant coaches last year, he was the most informative. Really gave thoughtful answers, thoughtful answers, and really gave me something to think about. A lot of his answers were nutritional. A lot of times when I listen to some of these interviews, there's no nutritional value, period. There's a lot of junk and empty calories, and you're just listening and you're like, okay, I could have kept that 15 minutes in my back pocket, but that's fine. You don't know what you're going to walk into. With Ken, I always felt like I walked away nourished. I felt like he just gave me some information that I didn't know prior to, or he confirmed something that I was thinking, or he gave me a different perspective that I wasn't considering. So I always enjoy listening to Ken Zampese speak. And he talked about the quarterback position. He talked about, of course, Ryan Fitzpatrick and what he brings to the table to this team, having coached him early in his career in Cincinnati and now coaching him again, some 15 years later. I think it's more like 10, 11, 12 years later, whatever the case may be. He's a totally different quarterback now. A night and day difference between the young guy that he saw in Cincinnati and the wily, cagey veteran that exists now. And he's like, this guy's got a tremendous sense of humor. He's a guy that, really brings a ton of energy. And I said this, I told you when I did the swag on 1,000 video, I said, Ryan Fitzpatrick has brought a level of swagger to this football team that didn't exist a year ago. Chase Young brought a ton of swag to the ball club, but we didn't have that on the offensive side. The offensive side of the football was dead, but the defense had swag, and a lot of that came from Young and Sweat and all of the young guys up there. The young boys were doing it big on that side of the ball, and Curl and all of those guys. But we were swagless on offense, and you can immediately see that not just to the offense, but to the entire team. Ryan Fitzpatrick has brought a level of swag to this team that didn't exist a year ago. So I think that is important. And essentially Ken Zampese said the same thing. And he also went on to talk about the quarterback 2 competition, QB 2 competition between Heineke and Allen. And he pretty much said, Allen came back, off this injury with a couple of extra tools in his bag. They gave him specific things to work on, and he came back sharp on those things. So he was really impressed by that. And he also said Taylor Heineke, the biggest thing for him is health. Got to stay healthy. They told him that before he left for the offseason. after the season was done, because obviously he got banged up in the Tampa game. Like, yo, dude, you got to stay healthy, man. You got the tools to be a really good quarterback in this league, but you got to stay healthy. So he reiterated that, and he said the thing that he's looking for out of that number two guy is consistency. The guy that when they draw up a play, can he get it there when he's supposed to who he's supposed to, in the timing that he's supposed to, and the guy that can make the least amount of mistakes, keep the offense on schedule, and make plays when they're there to be made. And so it's going to be interesting. That QB2 battle isn't something we've talked about, because I know some of you are holding out hope that Heineke's going to get that opportunity. Again, barring a catastrophe that I don't want to see happen, first and foremost. Heineke isn't going to start. The starter is Ryan Fitzpatrick. I think the real conversation is who's going to be QB2. That's the real conversation to be had. Steve Russ, linebackers coach, literally spent 10 of his 13 minutes talking about Jamin Davis, essentially. And you know how that goes. He's a first-round pick. Everybody wants to hear about his development. And I thought one thing about Coach Russ, his answers are always thoughtful and detailed. He's going to give you a long-winded answer, but he's going to answer your question. You're going to come away with a lot more than you bargained for when you wrote your little, 12-word question down on your pad to ask him. He's going to give you 2 full pages of transcribed notes to take back and write an article about, because he's going to give you a detailed, thorough breakdown. So, the Jamin Davis questions probably didn't warrant 10 minutes worth of answers, but he's so thorough, and I can appreciate that. So he essentially said this guy's so smart that, initially they were going to start him out. Look, they want him to play all 3 linebackers, and they do this for all, not just Jamin Davis. They do this for all their linebackers. Remember, when Davis was first drafted, the first thing they said is we're going to start him out as, our Sam, as strong side backer, because they didn't want to overload him. There's a lot that goes into being your middle linebacker. There's a lot in terms of play calling, getting guys lined up. Again, that's why they did not want to fool around with middle linebacker last year when Bostic was struggling, because there's a lot that entails with that position, and you have to be able to do all of those different things. Well, they didn't know how Jamin Davis was going to respond to having all of that on his plate, but having been around him now for the last, couple weeks, 3 weeks or whatever, they've been able to determine that this kid can handle it. And so they've been playing him at middle linebacker now. And, Coach Steve Russ was like, look, we try to do this with all our linebackers. We want all of these guys to be able to play multiple positions. He's like, hell, there were times where Cole Holcomb in specific games last season played all 3 positions in one game. And so you want guys to be comfortable shuffling around just in case an injury happens, or we get into a situation where we need a guy to go from strong to weak or from weak to middle, and they need to be able to do it seamlessly and not be slowed down or bogged down by having to think about what they have to do and what their jobs entail. They need to be able to just do it. And so they're getting Jamin Davis up to speed now on the middle linebacker position. Ultimately, that's what he played in college. I think that's what they drafted him to be here in the league. However, they want to make sure he can handle it before they throw him in the fire. And they said, this Coach Russ was saying, look, he's doing a hell of a job of adjusting right now. And what was most impressive on tape is the thing that they've been most impressed with to start camp. Obviously, there's no hitting, so you don't see him coming downhill in the run game right now. But he was like, I was so impressed with him in the pass game in college, and we have not been disappointed to this point in these camps. So really high on Jamin Davis right now, really high on Cole Holcomb. And he said, I love my entire group. We have a really good room. He talked about some of the guys that are continuing to develop, Kuznick. He talked about the a linebacker they got from Carolina, David Mayo. And he's like, yeah, I had Mayo in Carolina, so I know about him, and just talked about all of those guys. The special teams guy that we had from last year that came from Carolina, talked about him as well briefly. So Yeah, pretty much a lot of what he talked about was based around Jamin Davis and his development to this point, which has been outstanding. And then this one was interesting because, again, this one slipped by me. I can't speak for you. You might have known this already. But we have a new wide receivers coach. Now, he was here last year as an assistant wide receivers coach in Drew Terrell. I just didn't know that he had been promoted to wide receivers coach, not with the assistant title attached, but he's now the full-time wide receivers coach. I didn't know that. So remember, Jim Hassler, okay, Haas as they like to call him, was the wide receivers coach last year. Well, he's been given a new title. He's now the senior offensive assistant, and the wide receiving duties have been passed to Drew Terrell. So this was the first time I had heard of this. I did not know that this was the case. And this was my first time hearing from Drew Terrell. And I was very impressed. He's a young guy, so I love that. I love young coaches that have the ability to communicate because they have a different way. First of all, these veteran coaches are awesome because they have so much knowledge and experience. But there's something about a young coach that is different because they got different insight, they got a different perspective, and they come with a different level of sauce that they can put on their coaching. So, and I think they can kind of resonate with the younger players a little bit better, Anyway, listening to him talk, I got one big nugget from him, and he talked about his entire receiver group. But the biggest thing I took from him was his effusive praise for Cam Sims. And a lot of you said, bro, you tripping. Cam Sims is making his team. Look, AGG, no, he was a 4th-round pick last year. All of that stuff, cool. But he's not a lock. Cam Sims is the lock. AGG's fighting for his life with the rest of these dudes. You guys might be right about that. I may have to offer up a 00 down the road. I'm not doing that right now. But listening to Drew Terrell speak about Cam Sims and how impressed they were with him last year and how they can't wait to continue to see his growth and development this year, it's got me to thinking, I don't know, man. I don't see them getting rid of Cam Sims. The man said, Drew Terrell said, he was the glue in the wide receiver room last season. He was the glue that kept us together. He stepped up big for us. He's not wrong, okay? Without Cam Sims' production as wide receiver 2 last year, we would have been screwed on offense. We don't win the Pittsburgh game. We don't make the playoffs without Cam Sims. Let's call it a spade a spade. Let's keep it a buck and some change. All right? If we're going to keep it funky and filthy, without Cam Sims last year and his production, we're not 7-9. We're not NFC East champions. We don't make the playoffs. So he was important. But to hear the coach say he was the glue that held us together speaks volumes. And then he went on to say, this guy, so smart. He can play multiple positions. I love his growth, and I can't wait to see what he does this upcoming season. Does that sound like a guy that's getting cut to you? Because it damn sure doesn't sound like somebody that's about to get cut to me. So, I didn't say Cam Sims wasn't going to make the team. I just said he wasn't a lock. That sounded like a guy that's a lock to make the football team. But again, there's a lot of time between now and the end of August when final roster cuts are made. Anything can happen, but that's a good sign for Cam Sims. He also spoke about Steven Sims, and he was non-committal. Like, hey, look, he's gonna compete like everybody else, and he essentially said it's not impossible for him to make this roster, but we all know the writing's on the wall for Steven Sims. He had a chance last year, he didn't take advantage of it, but he said, it's good to have a diverse group, which we have at the receiver position. He said, look, let's face it, we got a hell of a room. And there are going to be some really good football players that aren't going to make the team, that are going to play football for other teams around the league. What have we been saying? Especially at the receiver position. And, Drew Terrell pretty much admitted, look, man, we going to cut some dudes that can play ball and are going to play ball for somebody, in this league, if not here. So it's going to be a hell of a competition. Not just at receiver, not just at safety, not just at defensive back, whatever they decide to do there, but also QB too. There's gonna be a lot of really intriguing, left tackle, right tackle, left guard. It's gonna be a lot of intriguing battles once we get to camp. So that's essentially coach speak. We'll talk about what Ron Rivera and the 6 players that spoke on day 1 of involuntary mini camp and what they had to say on a separate video. But this was a lot of information, so I didn't want to put them together. This video ran long already, 40 minutes. I told you I could go an hour plus if I would have added the other video content in. So I wanted to separate them. But, man, that was a lot. And that's why I didn't put it out yesterday, because I had to kind of take in and consume all of that information and be able to regurgitate it and spit it out to you in a consumable form. So without any further ado, I'm going to get out of here. I've already talked your head off long enough. I know you're probably at the point where you're tired of seeing my face and like, all right, that's enough. Okay, so I agree. So I am a Washington fan, etched in burgundy and gold. My Washington spirit will never die. Washington spirit will never fold until we meet again. Hail to our beloved Washington football team. I'm going to have another video breaking down day number 1 and what was said from involuntary minicamp day number 1. And I think it's going to be another day or 2 of it. And Rivera already said he's going to cut it short because he's been so pleased with what the guys have done. So it won't be as long as initially thought, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. But enjoy the rest of your day. Look forward to chopping it up with you. Remember, get off the bench and get in the game and kick it with me, your man, Louie T. Until next time, you guys, have a good one. And if you haven't already done so, like this video, subscribe to LouieTeeNetwork, and turn on your notification bell so you don't miss a thing.
LouieTeeNetwork.